I'd always thought our life was a painting, vivid colors, bold strokes, a masterpiece of trust and quiet moments. My wife, Elena, was the muse, her laughter the melody that kept our home humming. 20 years together, 2 kids grown and off to college, and a house we'd built from dreams and sweat. I'm Daniel, a structural engineer, a man who designs bridges, literal ones, the kind that hold weight and weather storms. I never imagined the bridge between us was rotting beneath my feet. It started with the little things. Elena's phone buzzing at odd hours, her fingers dancing over the screen with a secretive smile. She'd say it was work, her boutique downtown, always needing attention. I believed her because doubt felt like a betrayal of everything we'd forged. But then came the late nights. She'd slip in after midnight, her perfume sharper, her excuses flimsier. Inventory, she'd murmur, brushing past me to the shower. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the hum of water mocking my stillness. One Thursday, I found the first crack. I'd come home early, a rare lull at the firm, and there was a jacket on the couch. Leather worn, not mine. The scent clinging to it was musky, unfamiliar. "Oh, that's Marco's," Elena said, breezing in with grocery bags. "He stopped by to fix the sink." Marco, our plumber, a wiry guy with a crooked grin I'd met once. I nodded, swallowing the unease. Sinks don't leak that often, do they? But I let it go, because questioning her felt like dismantling my own foundation. The days stretched into weeks, and the signs piled up like debris after a storm. Lipstick on a wine glass I hadn't touched. A receipt in her purse for a restaurant I'd never been to. Dated a night she'd claimed a girls' night out. I started paying attention, really paying attention. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine over breakfast. Her voice, once warm, turned clipped, like she was rehearsing lines. I'd built my life on precision, on seeing how pieces fit, and now I saw the misalignment clear as day. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed proof, something undeniable, because suspicion alone wasn't enough to topple 20 years. So I watched. I listened. I became a shadow in my own home, tracing the edges of her lies. And then, one rainy afternoon, I found it. Her laptop, left open on the kitchen counter, a tab blinking with messages. "Can't wait to see you again." It read, signed with a heart and a name, Marco. My chest tightened, a steel beam bending under pressure. I scrolled, each word a hammer strike. They'd been meeting for months. Hotels, our car, our bed. The betrayal wasn't just the act, it was the audacity. Marco wasn't some stranger. He was the guy I'd shaken hands with, thanked for snaking our drain. Real, flesh and blood Marco, with his calloused palms and cheap cologne, had stepped into my life and taken what was mine. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling, and sat there as the rain drummed the windows. Elena would be home soon. I had to decide. Pretend I didn't know or start building something new. Not a bridge this time, but a reckoning. Elena walked in at 6, her hair damp from the rain, her smile practiced. "Hey, Han," she said, setting her keys on the counter. I nodded, my throat dry, the laptop's glow still burning behind my eyes. I could have shouted, demanded answers, but I didn't. I wanted her to feel safe, to keep spinning her web while I unraveled it. "Rough day?" I asked, stirring the pasta I'd thrown together. She sighed, theatrical, launching into a tale of a rude customer at the boutique. I listened, nodding, every word she spoke a brick in the wall I was building around her. Dinner was a performance. I chewed mechanically, watching her fork twirl spaghetti, her lips curling as she talked about fabric shipments. She didn't know I'd seen the messages, didn't know I was memorizing her every move. After, she kissed my cheek, light, perfunctory, and said she had paperwork to finish. I watched her retreat to the study, her silhouette framed by the doorway, and felt the first spark of something dark. Not sadness, not even anger yet. Purpose. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the garage, my sanctuary of tools and blueprints, and planned. I needed more than words on a screen. I needed to see it, to catch them in the act, because doubt still gnawed at me. What if I'd misread? What if Marco was a code, a friend, a misunderstanding? I laughed at myself, a hollow sound echoing off the concrete. No, I knew. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed evidence so airtight it'd choke them both. The next day, I called in sick. Elena left at 9, her usual routine, and I followed. Not in my truck, that'd be too obvious, but in a rental, a gray sedan I'd picked up that morning. She drove to the boutique, parked, went inside. I waited across the street, sipping coffee that tasted like ash, my binoculars trained on the glass doors. At 11, Marco's van rolled up. He swaggered in, toolbox in hand, and my grip tightened on the steering wheel. An hour later, they emerged, her arm brushing his as they climbed into her car. They didn't head downtown. They turned toward the suburbs, to a motel I'd passed 1,000 times without a second glance. I followed at a distance, my pulse a drumbeat. They parked, disappeared into room 14. I sat there, engine idling, the rain streaking my windshield like tears I couldn't shed. I didn't storm in. I didn't need to. I pulled out my phone, zoomed in, snapped photos, her car, his van, the neon sign flickering vacancy. It was real. It was happening. And I was done being the fool. Driving home, I felt the shift. The numbness cracked, and beneath it was heat. Molten, deliberate. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was an architect of consequences. Elena thought she could dance this dance, but she didn't know I'd learned the steps. I spent the afternoon in the garage, sketching. Not bridges, but a plan. Revenge, yes, but not the kind that explodes and fades. Something slow, precise. A structure that'd stand long after she realized it was too late. First, I needed more. I logged into her accounts, email, bank, phone records, guessing passwords she'd reused for years. Danny Elena 20. Our anniversary date. Irony stung as it worked. The digital trail was a goldmine. Hotel charges, texts to Marco's number, photos she'd sent him from our bathroom mirror. Each discovery fueled me, not with rage, but with clarity. I saved everything, backed it up on a drive I hid in my toolbox. Then I called Marco's plumbing business, posing as a client. He's booked today, his receptionist chirped. Out on a job. I smiled, knowing exactly where he was. I asked about his schedule, his rates, his life, fishing for details. She mentioned his wife, Lisa, and 2 kids. Family man just like me. The symmetry was almost poetic. I hung up, adding Lisa to my blueprint. If Marco wanted to play in my world, I'd step into his. That night, Elena came home late again, her excuse a shipment delay. I played along, pouring her wine, asking about her day. She relaxed, oblivious, while I studied her. The way her fingers tapped the glass, the flicker of guilt she couldn't quite hide. I didn't tip my hand. I needed her comfortable, her guard down, because the foundation of my plan relied on her ignorance. After she went to bed, I stayed up, researching. Not just Marco and Lisa, but the motel, the boutique, every thread I could pull. By morning, I had a framework. This wouldn't be quick. It'd be a slow collapse, each piece falling exactly where I wanted. I'd use what I knew, my skill with systems, my patience with load-bearing points. Elena and Marco thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. A week later, I made my move. Subtle, surgical, the kind of cut that bleeds slow. I started with Lisa, Marco's wife. I found her on social media, blonde, tired-eyed, posting about her kids' soccer games. I created a burner account, anonymous, and sent her a message. You deserve to know the truth about your husband. Check his phone. Look for Elena. No details, no threats, just enough to plant the seed. I hit send, leaned back, and waited. Meanwhile, I kept Elena close. I cooked dinners, suggested movie nights, even bought her flowers, daffodils, her favorite. She softened, confused by my warmth, and I let her think we were mending. You've been so sweet lately, she said one evening, her hand on mine. I smiled, squeezing back, my mind on the photos I'd taken, the messages I'd saved. She had no idea the ground was shifting beneath her. 2 days later, Marco's van didn't show at the boutique. I drove by, casual, and saw Elena pacing outside, phone to her ear, her face tight. I didn't need to hear the call to know Lisa had acted. I pictured the scene. Marco stammering, Lisa crying, the kids confused in the background. Good. Let him squirm. Let her wonder. I kept my routine steady, my mask intact, while the cracks spread. That night, Elena was distracted, snapping at me over nothing. A spilled glass, a loud TV. Everything okay? I asked, all concern. She muttered about stress, retreating to the study. I followed later, silent, and saw her texting furiously, her screen lighting her furrowed brow. I didn't need to read it. I'd already sown the chaos. Now I'd watch it grow. The next morning I upped the ante. I called the boutique's landlord, pretending to be a concerned neighbor, and reported suspicious activity after hours. People coming and going, not business-related. I said, voice low. He promised to look into it. Elena would have to explain that to her staff, her customers. A small jab, but one that'd sting. I wanted her world to tighten, inch by inch. Elena started unraveling. She hid it well at first. More makeup, forced smiles, but I saw the fraying edges. Phone calls she'd take in the yard. Her voice hushed, sharp. Marco hadn't been around, and I knew why. Lisa had posted a cryptic update online. Trust is everything. Learning that the hard way. Comments poured in, sympathy questions. I scrolled through, sipping my coffee, satisfied. The first domino had fallen. I kept digging. Marco's business had a website, reviews glowing with praise, until I got involved. Another burner account, another strike. I left a detailed complaint. Unreliable. Showed up late. Overcharged. Flirted with my wife. Fiction, but believable. More followed, each from a different IP, a chorus of discontent. His rating dropped, and I imagined the calls drying up, the stress piling on. At home, Elena grew brittle. The landlord's asking questions. She snapped one night, pacing the kitchen. Someone's spreading lies. I feigned shock, offered help. Maybe it's a competitor, I said, stirring soup. She nodded, distracted, while I hid my grin. The boutique was her pride, her escape, and now it was a cage. I added pressure, canceled a joint credit card, claiming a fraud alert. Just temporary, I assured her, watching her scramble to cover expenses. Then came the motel. I mailed an envelope to the manager. Photos of Elena's car, Marco's van, dates and times. Anonymous. Your establishment's being used for illicit meetings, I wrote. Thought you'd want to know. A day later, I drove by. A no loitering sign was up, a security camera blinking. Their hideout was compromised. Elena's next late night would need a new venue, and I'd be ready. She didn't suspect me. Not yet. I was still Daniel, the steady husband, the rock she'd leaned on. But I wasn't that man anymore. I was a force, bending her life to my design. And this was just the beginning. Elena's world was shrinking, and I was the architect of its walls. She didn't see me yet. Not the real me, the one pulling levers behind the curtain. She still thought I was the Daniel who fixed leaky faucets and kissed her forehead at night. I let her believe it, because the longer she stayed blind, the deeper I could carve my mark. The boutique's landlord had upped her rent, citing concerns about reputation. Marco's business was bleeding clients, his online presence a graveyard of one-star reviews. And Lisa, poor, furious Lisa, was posting more, her vague rants hinting at a marriage on the brink. I watched Elena over breakfast, her coffee trembling in her hands. Everything's falling apart, she muttered, eyes darting to her phone. I murmured sympathy, buttering toast, my mind elsewhere. I'd started tailing her again, the rental car my ghost on her trail. She'd stopped going to the motel. Too risky now. But I knew she wouldn't let Marco go. Not yet. She was stubborn, always had been, and that was my lever. I just needed to find their new nest. It didn't take long. Friday night, she said she had a vendor meeting downtown. I followed, keeping my distance, and watched her pull into a parking lot behind an old warehouse. Marco's van was already there, tucked between rusted shipping containers. They didn't go inside, just sat in her car, windows fogging in the cool air. I parked a block away, binoculars steady, and snapped photos. Her head tilted toward him, his hand on her thigh. My stomach twisted, but I swallowed it. This wasn't about pain anymore, it was about precision. I didn't interrupt. I drove home, uploaded the pictures, and added them to my growing archive. Then I got creative. I printed one, a clear shot of their silhouettes, and slipped it into an envelope with no return address. I mailed it to Lisa, knowing she'd recognize the van, the posture. Let her rage fuel the fire I'd lit. Let Marco feel the heat from both sides. When Elena came home, flushed and distant, I greeted her with a smile. "Good meeting?" I asked. She nodded, too quick, and I savored the lie. The next day, I struck again. I called the warehouse's property manager, anonymous, and reported suspicious vehicles loitering after hours. I mentioned drugs, vagrants, enough to spook them into action. By Monday, signs were up, private property, no parking. Their little haven was gone. Elena's texts to Marco, intercepted via her synced account, grew frantic. "Where now?" she wrote. His replies were curt, stressed. I leaned back in my garage chair, the hum of my tools a quiet hymn to my progress. Elena started breaking, and it was beautiful in its ugliness. She'd snap at me over nothing. Burnt toast, a misplaced sock, her patience frayed like old rope. I stayed calm, the eye of her storm, letting her unravel while I tightened my grip. Marco's life was crumbling too. Lisa had kicked him out. I saw it on her social media. A photo of his toolbox on the curb captioned, "Good riddance." His business line went to voicemail, his website offline. I'd done that piece by piece, and it felt like laying perfect concrete. I needed more leverage, though. I dug into Elena's boutique, tax records, suppliers, employees. She'd been sloppy, skimming cash for her nights out, leaving a trail a blind man could follow. I didn't report it, not yet. Instead, I contacted her biggest supplier, posing as a concerned partner. "She's been late on payments," I said, voice grave. "Might be trouble ahead." They cut her credit line that week. She came home ranting about unreliable vendors, oblivious to my shadow behind it. Then I turned to our community. We'd lived here 20 years. Neighbors, friends, a tight circle. I started planting seeds. Elena's been so stressed. I'd say over coffee with Tom next door. Not herself. Late nights, strange calls. I trail off, let their minds fill the gaps. Word spread, whispers at book club, glances at the grocery store. She felt it, I could tell. "Why's everyone acting weird?" she asked one night, slamming a cabinet. I shrugged. Innocent. "No idea, hon." Marco was next. I found his new address, a cheap apartment across town, courtesy of a public records search. I mailed another envelope, photos, dates, Elena's license plate, addressed to his landlord. "Your tenant's bringing trouble," I wrote. "Eviction notices take time, but the pressure would mount." I pictured him sweating, scrambling, and smiled into my beer. That night, Elena cried. First time in months. "I don't know what's happening," she sobbed, head in her hands. I held her, murmuring comfort, my arms a cage she didn't see. I'd broken her rhythm, her sanctuaries, her pride. But I wasn't done. The real blow was coming, and she'd never see it swing. The cracks were visible now, jagged lines across Elena's perfect mask. She'd stopped hiding her phone, too rattled to care, and I read the desperation in her messages to Marco. "We need to talk," she typed. "This is too much." His replies were sporadic, cold. "Lisa's got a lawyer. I'm done." I watched her pace the living room, oblivious to my eyes, and felt the weight of my plans settling into place. She thought she was losing him. She didn't know she'd already lost everything. I struck the boutique next. I'd gathered enough receipts, bank statements, her own handwritten notes, to prove she'd been cooking the books. I didn't go to the IRS. Too obvious. Instead, I sent an anonymous tip to her accountant, a nervous guy named Phil who'd always struck me as a stickler. "Check her records," I wrote. "She's hiding something." Phil called her the next day. I heard her shouting through the study door, promising to fix it. The noose tightened. Our social circle turned sharper. At a neighborhood barbecue, I let slip more crumbs. She's been distant, I told Sarah, the gossip queen, my voice low. Found some odd receipts too. Sarah's eyes widened, and by evening, Elena was fielding awkward questions about her busy schedule. She glared at me across the yard, suspecting something, but I just smiled, flipping burgers. Let her wonder. Let her stew. Marco's landlord served him papers. I drove by, saw the notice taped to his door. His van was gone, probably sold to cover rent. Elena didn't know yet, but she'd feel it soon. I kept her off balance, canceling another card, claiming identity theft. Her boutique account bounced a payment, and her staff started whispering. She came home pale, muttering about layoffs, and I nodded, all concern. We'll figure it out, I lied. That night, she tried reaching Marco. I cloned her phone weeks ago, saw the call fail, the texts go unanswered. She threw her phone across the room, cracking the screen, and I watched from the hall, silent. Her empire, her lies, her lover was dust, and I was the wind that blew it away. Elena broke on a Tuesday. I'd been waiting for it, the moment she'd crack and spill, thinking I'd catch her fall. She sat me down, hands shaking, eyes red. Daniel, I need to tell you something, she started, voice thin. I leaned in, feigning worry, my heart steady as stone. I've been seeing someone. Marco. It's over now. But I'm so sorry. She choked on the words, tears spilling, expecting absolution. I let the silence stretch, my face a mask of shock, then pain. Marco, I whispered, voice breaking just right. The plumber. She nodded, sobbing, reaching for my hand. I pulled back, slow, deliberate. How long? I asked. Months, she admitted, listing dates that matched my evidence. I stood, pacing, letting her think I was reeling. I need time, I said finally, grabbing my keys. She begged me to stay, but I left, the door slamming a perfect note. I didn't go far, just the garage where I sat, replaying her words. She'd handed me the confession, gift-wrapped, and I'd use it. I called a lawyer the next morning, a shark named Claire who lived for messy divorces. She admitted it. I told her, forwarding the photos, the texts, the financial dirt. I want everything, house, savings, her business if it's still standing. Claire laughed, a predator's glee. She's toast. Elena tried mending things when I returned. Flowers, apologies, promises to fix us. I played along, distant but not hostile, letting her hope. Meanwhile, I met Lisa. Coffee shop, neutral ground. He ruined me, she said, voice raw. Her too. I nodded, showing just enough photos, dates. She's not innocent, I said. Lisa's eyes hardened. I want them both to pay. I smiled. They will. The divorce papers hit Elena like a brick through glass. I served them at home. Her boutique closed for renovations she couldn't afford. What is this? She shrieked, hands trembling over the pages. I'm done, Elena, I said, calm, cold. You chose this. She cried, raged, but I walked away, the house keys in my pocket. Claire had it locked. Adultery, financial misconduct, my name on every asset. She'd get nothing. Marco was next. Lisa filed too, armed with my evidence, and his world imploded. No business, no home, no family. I heard he'd moved into a friend's basement, a shadow of the man who'd swaggered into my life. I didn't stop there. I sold the boutique's lease out from under Elena, quietly, legally, to a chain store eager for the spot. Her employees quit, her customers vanished. She was a ghost in her own story. I kept the house, redecorated it, her traces scrubbed, every room mine. Neighbors rallied around me, the wronged husband. While Elena slunk to a rented room downtown, Lisa and I stayed in touch, allies in ruin. She thanked me once over coffee. You destroyed them, she said, almost awed. I nodded, sipping. They built the trap. I just sprung it. The revenge wasn't loud, wasn't fast. It was a slow grind, a collapse of everything they'd touched. Elena called sometimes, begging, but I never answered. Marco disappeared from the grid. And me? I stood on the wreckage, my bridge rebuilt, stronger than ever. The dust settled, but I didn't rest. Elena's calls dwindled, her voice on the machine a fading plea I deleted without listening. The house was mine now, a fortress of solitude, every corner scrubbed of her presence. I'd painted the walls a stark white, replaced her floral curtains with steel blinds, turned our bedroom into a study lined with my blueprints. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a monument to my victory, a testament to what I'd reclaimed. I drove by her new place once, a dingy apartment above a laundromat, its windows smudged with neglect. Her car sat out front, tires flat, a parking ticket flapping under the wiper. I didn't linger, just noted the decay, the way her life had shrunk to fit the hole she'd dug. Marco was harder to track, but rumors reached me through Lisa. He'd lost the basement gig, was couchsurfing now, his tools pawned for rent. I pictured him, unshaven, hollow-eyed, and felt the quiet hum of satisfaction. The neighborhood buzzed with my story. Poor Daniel, betrayed but unbroken. I played the part, humble, stoic, letting their pity cement my pedestal. "You're so strong," Sarah said at a potluck, her casserole steaming between us. I shrugged, spooning gravy, knowing they'd never see the gears I'd turned. Elena's name was a whisper now, a cautionary tale swapped over fences. I'd made her a pariah without raising my voice. But I wasn't done. I found her boutique's old website, still cached online, and bought the domain when it lapsed. I turned it into a memorial, a gallery of her downfall. Anonymous, of course. Photos of the empty storefront, her bounce checks scanned and blurred just enough, snippets of her texts to Marco. For the Curious, I titled it, and sent the link to her former employees, her suppliers, her girls' night crew. No one could prove it was me, but the hits climbed, a silent chorus of her shame. Lisa called me one night, her voice steady. "She's working at a diner now," she said. Saw her wiping tables, hair in a net. I leaned back, imagining Elena in a stained apron, her pride ground to flour. "And him?" I asked. "Junkyard, last I heard. Picking scraps." We laughed, a dark, shared chord, and hung up. The revenge was alive, breathing, a structure I'd built to last. Elena's fall needed an audience. I'd kept it quiet too long. I'd learned her diner's name from Lisa, a greasy spoon off the highway, and decided it was time, not to confront but to display. I invited Tom and Sarah, framed it as a casual lunch. "New place I heard about," I said, steering us there. We walked in, and there she was, tray in hand, ketchup stains on her sleeve, eyes down. She froze when she saw me, the tray wobbling, and I smiled, all teeth. "Daniel," Sarah whispered, spotting her too. I nodded, solemn. "Didn't know she'd be here." A lie smooth as glass. Tom's jaw tightened. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, and Elena bolted to the back, dropping a plate. The crash drew stares, whispers rippling through the booths. I ordered coffee, calm, letting the scene play out. She didn't return, probably crying in the kitchen, and we left after an hour, the neighbors' tongues already wagging. Word spread like wildfire. By Sunday, the church group was praying for that poor woman. But their eyes slid to me, admiring. I'd flipped the script. She was the villain now, the cautionary tale, while I was the saint who'd endured. I fueled it, casual drops in conversation. "She's struggling, I hear. Tough break." No one asked her side, they didn't need to. I painted the picture and they hung it high. Online, the boutique site grew. Someone, maybe an ex-employee, added comments. "She deserves it. Karma's real." I didn't respond, just watched the traffic spike. Then I mailed prints of her texts to her diner boss, anonymous, with a note, "Your worker's character. She was fired that week," Lisa told me, caught pocketing tips to cover rent. I toasted myself with whiskey that night, the burn a fitting salute. I found a box in the attic, her old things, forgotten in my purge. Photos, letters, a scarf she'd knitted early in our marriage. Could have burned it, but that was too easy. Instead, I packaged it, every scrap of our past, and shipped it to her apartment, no note, just the return address. our house. Let her open it, see the life she'd torched, feel the weight of 20 years returned like a slap. Next, I sold her jewelry. The diamond earrings I'd bought for our 10th, the gold chain from her mother, all appraised, all liquidated. I donated the cash to a shelter for betrayed spouses, sent the receipt to her new email, cracked from her old password habits. In your honor, I wrote, signing my name. She'd know it was me, know I'd turned her treasures to dust. And I wanted her to feel that twist. Marco got his relic too. I tracked his junkyard through a contact, sent a photo of his van parked by our house, back when he'd fixed the sink. On the back, I wrote, remember this? No signature, just the image mailed to his boss. He was let go days later, unreliable, they said. I imagined him staring at that picture, the memory a splinter he couldn't pull. Our kids called, worried. Mom's a mess, our daughter said, voice tight. I sighed, the grieving father. She made choices, sweetheart. I tried. They didn't push. Too far away, too busy. And I let them drift, knowing Elena's pleas wouldn't sway them. I'd raised them steady, while she chased shadows. Her bridges to them were ash now, and I stood firm on the other side. Elena's apartment evicted her. I tipped the landlord about her unstable employment. A quiet call from a payphone. She moved to a motel, the irony thick, her car towed for unpaid tickets. I drove by once, saw her lugging a trash bag of clothes, her face gaunt, and felt the structure complete. Not rage, not joy, just the click of a perfect joint locking into place. Marco vanished. Lisa said he'd left town. No forwarding address, his name a ghost in the county records. I'd crushed him. Business, marriage, pride, and swept the debris away. I checked the boutique site one last time, saw it had gone viral locally. A thread on a forum linking it to that diner lady. I shut it down, my work done. The echo loud enough. Our divorce finalized. Claire had bled Elena dry. Legal fees she couldn't pay, assets all mine. She got a pittance, enough for a bus ticket. And I heard she'd gone south, chasing a cousin's couch. I sold the house after, too big for one, and bought a cabin in the mountains, remote, clean, mine. The neighbors threw me a send-off, toasting my new start. And I smiled, the weight of my tools in my truck. Lisa met me before I left, handed me a coffee. You're a force, Daniel, she said, half admiring, half afraid. I shrugged. They chose the game. I just played it better. She nodded, and we parted. Her life rebuilding while theirs lay in rubble. The cabin smells of pine. My days filled with blueprints. Bridges again, real ones, for a firm upstate. I hike at dawn, the silence a bomb. My hands steady on the axe splitting wood. Elena's a memory, Marco a footnote. Their lives collapsed under my design. I don't gloat. I don't need to. The revenge was the building, not the ruin. A structure of patience and precision that'll stand long after they're forgotten. Sometimes I check the old neighborhood forums. See my name praised, hers pitted then ignored. The kids call less, but they're fine and I'm enough. I sip coffee on my porch, the valley sprawling below, and know I've won. Not with noise, not with fists, but with the quiet strength of a man who turns betrayal into art.